To truly change is to think greater than your environment. To change is to think and act differently in the same circumstances in your life, which means the environment is no longer causing you to think, but you are thinking independent of the stimulus from your environment. And by the way, that's what we admire about all great people in history, whether it was Martin Luther King or William Wallace or Gandhi. They said, I have a dream or an idea, I have this vision, and I'm going to think and act as if it already is. And if you can't see it because you're limited by your senses, you're being human. And for me, I can't compromise what I know, and I have to think and act differently in the same environment that you're living in. Now, isn't that greatness? When we're in the midst of change, or when we're in the midst of breaking through our own limitations, there's a voice that secretly always talks us out of our greatness. And we believe that that voice is absolutely correct. And one of the greatest moments in my life came when I realized just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Dr. Joe Dispenza is a leading expert in the world of neuroscience and epigenetics. His transformational journey began after a brutal cycling accident when doctors told him that he would never walk again. He has since gone on to write several New York Times best-selling books, become one of the highest-paid speakers in the world, and inspire millions of people globally with his story. In this exclusive speech from the Celebrate Your Life stage, Joe Dispenza explains how to break negative thinking patterns, adopt a mindset for success, and achieve lasting change. Special thanks to Liz Don for partnering with us to release this exclusive content on our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
What I want to talk to you about today is about your potential. I want to spend a little time with you and begin to unravel the idea about what it is to change and what neuroscience has to say about change and why it's so difficult to change, and what this idea called neuroplasticity in neuroscience awards us with opportunities that make connections between the mind and the body, then ultimately your life. See, because I'm a firm believer that, according to quantum physics, your environment is an extension of your mind. And if we could make changes in our mind, permanent neurological changes in our mind, and begin to cause the brain to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, and new combinations, to form new neural networks in our brain. If we knew how to do that, and we were able to change our mind, and if the environment is an extension of our mind, would you agree then that by just changing your mind, there should be some measurable change in your life? That there should be something different in your external world that reflects the changes that you've made internally? How many people can believe that as a possibility? Well, that's what I'm about, and that's what I'm interested in. My interest is about unifying those ideas and allowing life to become this scientific experiment. Your life. When we talk about reality, when scientists talk about the nature of reality, there is the big reality, and then there's the reality called your life. And your life is your scientific experiment. And if there is something in your life that you don't like, then we have to examine the way we're thinking and we're acting. And in order to change our life, instead of pushing people away or making dramatic changes, that if we could change something internally then, and be the masters of our own thought, and begin to wire new circuits and new connections, then what's happening internally should be reflected externally. And that's the scientific experiment. That is your experiment. That is my experiment. And if we look at the movie, What the Bleep, the movie was a great opportunity for people to begin to transcend gender and transcend culture and transcend, race and age and social status, and to transcend all the things that we think make us separate as human beings. You see, because if you're alive and your heart is beating and you have a brain, there is some divine element that's giving you life. And the question is, can you develop a relationship with that greater mind? Can you develop a relationship with it just like you have a relationship with your husband or your wife or your kids or your dog? And does this greater mind know more than we know? And if it's giving us life independent of our moods and our emotional reactions and our stray thoughts and our afflictive emotional states, something is loving us enough to give us life every single day. And if you develop a relationship with that mind, then, in fact, it begins to work wonders in your life. So there's this balance that takes place, in this game. that we have to have intention, because intention, in my greatest level of ignorance, means to get clear on what we want, to know what you want, to be absolutely clear, and to balance the head and the heart so what you want is really what you want. And then if we balance intention, we have to somehow work with this idea called surrender. Surrender, then knowing that this greater mind is going to orchestrate the events in our life much better than we could ever do it. So it's good to see some men in the audience finally. And men have the intention thing down. They're single-minded no matter what it is. You know what I mean? And so they have the intention aspect down, but that's only the first half. But women have that surrender part down, the trust. And when we can balance those two aspects of surrender and intention, we then begin to move off the routine ways that we live every single day, doing the same things, thinking the same thoughts, and expecting something different to happen in our life. We do that all day long. So the movie then was a great opportunity for people to begin to look at themselves. And what everybody secretly believes in is their own greatness. They always think they can do a better job. And that, in its simple sense, really is human potential. And so if you can take quantum physics and neuroscience and neurochemistry and neurobiology and biochemistry and receptor site physiology and protein production, and we paste that all together. The remarkable thing is that movie was about you. And isn't that refreshing for a change? To help us understand the nature of who we are and why we keep creating the same things in our life, the same circumstances, the same jobs, the same relationships, the same predictable and repeatable actions and results happen in our life. And we become lulled into sleep. We become these unconscious people losing track of their own divinity. And you see, we believe it's what's happening in our external world, what's happening out there, is more real than what's happening in here. Because that's the way we've been trained. And if we accept that our thoughts have anything to do with our future, anything to do with your future, and we know then, we live every single day of our life exposing our senses, exposing ourselves to our external world, and all the events and all the people and all the things in our life that we can recognize as familiar are causing our brain to fire different circuits. In other words, the environment is causing us to think. And if thinking has anything to do with the future and the environment is causing us to think, what are we creating more of the same? The same circumstances and the same events, because we cannot think greater than our environment. And to change, to truly change, is to think greater than your environment. To change is to think and act differently in the same circumstances in your life. Which means the environment is no longer causing you to think, but you are thinking independent of the stimulus from your environment. And by the way, that's what we admire about all great people in history. Whether it was Martin Luther King or William Wallace or Gandhi, they said, I have a dream or an idea, I have this vision, and I'm going to think and act as if it already is. And if you can't see it, because you're limited by your senses, you're being human. And for me, I can't compromise what I know, and I have to think and act differently in the same environment that you're living in. Now, isn't that greatness? So in all the places I've been around the world, and talking about what the bleep, and talking about the movie in itself, do you know the most common thing people say to me? They always say, that movie is what I already secretly knew, but I didn't know how to put into words. How many people have that experience? In other words, they say, I already knew that. And isn't that also cool? Because what it says then is that now you no longer have to be given permission to do the uncommon. And so most people, they hide, they retract from their own greatness because there's this voice when we're in the midst of change, or when we're in the midst of breaking through our own limitations, there's a voice that secretly always talks us out of our greatness. And we believe that that voice is absolutely correct. And one of the greatest moments in my life came when I realized just because you have a thought doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So what happens in change then? What happened to that woman in the movie? She was handicapped, right? And you would think on first glance she was handicapped because why? She was deaf and she had a speech impediment. But if you paid attention after a few minutes, what did you realize? She was really handicapped because she was perceiving reality based on her afflictive emotional states. She was perceiving reality based on her past. She was perceiving reality based on her internal chemical state. And you know, she was a master, by the way, a master of suffering. And you could master anything in your life. Do you know that? And to master anything means that nothing from the external environment is going to change your internal state. Would you agree? Yeah. So how many people here know someone that loves to suffer? And you say to them, hey, come on, let's go to the movies. Come on, let's go do something fun. And what do they say? No. This is I'm feeling this way, and it's not going. I don't want to disrupt my chemical continuity. I don't want anything. You especially, that person is not going to change my internal state. I'm mastering this. I'm insistent on my chemical state. And then you can say to them, hey, let's go for a walk on the boardwalk, and then we'll go see stand-up comedy. Let's go do it. And what do they say? No, you see, that person didn't call me 6 weeks ago, and I'm still upset about that. Which means I'm enjoying and remembering who I am based on my past memory. Would you agree? Now, tomorrow we're going to talk at length. I'm going to talk at length about what it is to change. And I'm going to show you that there are memory systems in place in the brain for mastery. Now, here's my next question. Could you then gain a little bit of knowledge, apply that knowledge, have an experience? That experience creates new feelings, and those new feelings are feelings based in joy and self-love and wonder and awe and the excitement to be alive. And would you agree then that that's a new internal chemical state? Would you agree? Now, could you agree then if you were so insistent on that internal chemical state of joy that nothing from your external environment could move you from it? Is that possible? And isn't it just the same as the person who insists on their suffering? And neurochemically and neurobiologically and neuroscience, it's the exact same thing. Which means the person who creates enough of a chemical continuity of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking of joy, and they're able to master that and insist on it, then nothing from their external environment should move them from that. Is that true as well? So you see this person in the movie who's handicapped because she's perceiving life. She's perceiving her world based on some defining memory that created enough of a chemical change in her that she now identifies herself as being that experience. Now, do you think that any point in your life, in your normal living day, that you perceive reality based on your past? You think you might do that a little bit? And you know the big thing that causes us to stay lost in the quagmire of viewing our world from the past has everything to do with routine. So they did this experiment where they took these people and they gave them these lenses to wear, and they said, look, wear these lenses with everything you do. If you go take your kids to school, wear them. If you go to work, you go home and you shop, and all your activities, all your routine things, we want you to wear these lenses all the time. Now, these lenses were different lenses because they were glasses, and if you looked to the left, you saw blue. And if you looked to the right, you saw yellow. And they said, wear these all the time, and at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to bring you into the lab and see what's going on. So 2 weeks later, they bring the people into the lab, and they say, okay, you ready? Look to the left. What color do you see? And they said, we don't see a color. Now, look to the left. You should see blue. No, we don't see blue. Now, look to the right. You should see yellow. No, we don't see yellow either. Now, what the scientists fundamentally began to realize in that moment is not the eyes that see, but it's the brain and our neurological processes that allow us to interpret reality. But what they really began to realize was that these people were filling in reality based on their memory. Because if the eyes could see, and the eyes were the lens to see, then every time they look to the left, objectively, they should see blue, right? But the more routine and the more predictable and the more status quo they lived their life, the faster the colors went away. And so they were overlaying reality based on their memory. And you and I do that all the time. And the more routine we are in living in predictable ways, the more we overlay reality based on our internal chemical state. if you took a group of people that were depressed and you showed them 100 slides and 50 slides were funeral scenes and 50 slides were wedding scenes, guess which slides the depressed people remember more? Oh, there were way more funeral scenes. And if you take the people that live in a state of joy and you ask them which scenes they remember more, guess what they remember? So then there's this neurochemical state that we live by that we think is status quo. But in fact, do you know that every time you have a thought, you make a chemical? And if you have great thoughts and happy thoughts and unlimited thoughts, this immaterial thing called thought becomes a chemical. And now that chemical rushes through your bloodstream, and in a matter of seconds, you begin to feel great or happy or unlimited. So the thought then turns into this chemical that signals the body to allow us to begin to feel exactly the way we were just thinking. Now in the same second, you could have an angry thought or an unworthy thought or a hateful thought. In a matter of seconds, you're going to begin to feel angry or unworthy, or you're going to feel hatred. Would you agree? Now here's the kicker. The moment we begin to feel the way we were just thinking, because the body's in constant communication with the brain, and the brain is always calibrating what the body's doing, the moment we begin to feel the way we're thinking, we begin to think the way we're feeling, which then creates more chemicals for us to then feel the way we think and think the way we feel. So ultimately we create what's called a state of being. In other words, feelings become the means of thinking. And when feelings become the means of thinking, in other words, if we can't think outside of how we feel, now our personality, now our identity is a sealed deal. And to change then, to truly change, is to think greater than how you feel. To think greater than your present internal chemistry. So if you have a thought right now, play a game. If I said, have an insecure thought, just think something insecure. If I said, come on up here and I'm going to work with you right now. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Most people, may not be prepared for that, right? So if you had an insecure thought in that moment, would you agree that in 1 second you would begin to feel insecure? And then once you started to feel insecure, wouldn't you start to think more insecure thoughts? Which then would make more feelings of insecurity? Well, people do that for 30 or 40 years of their life. And they create this state of being where they say, well, I'm just really just a shy person. Or I'm really, angry person. Or I have a short temper. These temperaments begin to form. So then why is it so hard to change? Why? Well, the unconscious has a large part to do with that, and we'll talk about that. No, it's really simple. You ready? Yeah. To change is uncomfortable. That's it. And to think and act differently in the same environment, if you lived 15 years in the chemical continuity of suffering, and all of a sudden, now you guys are geniuses, right? All of a sudden, you start to think and act differently in the same environment. Would you agree then that you're no longer making those same brain chemicals that allow you to feel certain ways? So now for 20 years, you've been doing this thinking and feeling and thinking really well, and all of a sudden you're going to stop. And all of a sudden, you're no longer sending the same signal to the body. Would you agree? You're not sending those neuropeptides that carry a message to the body to turn the different hormonal centers in the body for you to start cranking out these chemicals so you can remember who you are. Then all of a sudden, all the cells of the body get together and they go like this. What is she doing up there? We've been doing this for 20 years. It's predictable. It's repeatable. Even though it feels bad, it feels pretty good. Now, all of a sudden, we've modified our receptor sites just for her. And now she's all of a sudden going to stop. Well, this is not going to work for us. Because I want you to know the greatest habit that we have to break as human beings is breaking the habit of being ourselves. And you know what a habit is? A habit is when the body has become the mind. And so 20 years of conditioning the cells of the body to live in unhappiness. 20 years of suffering, 20 years of unhappiness. We're conditioning the body over and over again for the body to ultimately get enough experience and enough chemicals that it now thinks it's the mind. In other words, when we're in a habit, the body's doing the thinking for us. The body has become the mind. And there's memory systems in place that I can show you in neuroscience that proves it. But forget it. It's the truth. Wouldn't you agree that when you want to change something and you're in a habit, you have to overcome the needs of your body? So to change then is take the body and address it and realize that the body has become the mind, and take the mind out of the body and put it back in the brain where it belongs. Now that takes a little practice. Because the moment you say, I'm no longer going to fire these thoughts of suffering, today is the day. The moment you say that, you know what happens? Those cells all huddle up together and they go, let's send a message to the brain. Because we're the boss. It thinks it's the boss, but really we're telling it how to think for the last 20 years. Because here's the question. Do your thoughts control your emotions? Or do your emotions control your thoughts? Well, if your emotions control your thoughts and you're living in repeated cycles, then it becomes very difficult to change. So those cells then send a message back up to the brain, to the central nervous system. I call it the fast track. Sends it right up to the brain. And there's a little thermostat in the brain that's monitoring the chemistry of the bloodstream. And all of a sudden, you're no longer making the same chemicals of thought, and the blood levels start to drop, and the brain notices that, and it says, we can't have this either. So that's the slow track through the circulatory system. And as you're in the midst of change, you start off and you say, today, I'm not going to be angry. Today, it's over. And all of a sudden, an hour later, you start to hear this chatter in your head. I call it awfulizing. You start to awfulize. You start to have these voices, and you know what those voices say? They say stuff like this. You can start tomorrow.
The rest of your life.
Today's not a good day. Or, remember I said to change is to be greater than your environment, right? That person made me so mad. Any other time but this time, I'm going to have to tell her off. Or this is my favorite one. This just doesn't feel right. What feels right is that I get angry. And the next thing you know, you're thinking and acting the same way again. And so if we understand that change is an uncomfortable process, that we live in a convenience society, convenience and comfort. If your internet connection doesn't come up within 30 seconds, you are just upset, right? This is not cool. So to change then, the moment there's a disruption in this chemical continuity, the body goes into chaos. And it still thinks it's the boss, so it tries to talk us into thinking and acting in the same way. And the moment we start to feel the same way, you know what we say? That was close. And so we can declare, we can make a conscious declaration, we can have an intention that we want to change. But we've conditioned the body for 20 years to be unhappy. And so you say, today I want to be happy, but the body has been conditioned 20 years of being unhappy that it's become the mind. And so you say, I'm ready to be happy, or I'm ready to be healthy, or I'm ready to be, free. And then 2 hours later, you're on the couch with the remote control and eating bonbons, and you don't know how you got there. Because those memory systems that have to do with the body being the mind are unconscious processes. Where's my guy? They're unconscious processes because there's a memory system in place that if we repeat something over and over again, we can do it without thinking about it. You know what I mean? And so it only takes one stimulus from the environment, one person or one event, one episode, or one stray thought from our own mind. And immediately it activates a certain circuit. And once it activates that circuit, we go on automatic. And the brain scan technology shows that when we use these, what's called implicit memories, that it takes no conscious effort to do it. In other words, the brain is asleep while you're running all these automatic programs. And you know how many of those automatic programs we have? Tons of them. You know what neuroscience says and psychology says, that by the time you're 35 years old, personality is a sealed deal, right? You know what that really means? By the time you're 35, you stop learning and you start feeling. Which means then that you're not learning anything new. And we're judging every new experience based on what it's going to feel like. And if we don't like the way it's going to feel, what do we say? No, I don't want to do that. No, I don't. Well, there's a UFO landing in the backyard. Come on, they're asking us to go on. Well, is there going to be dinner on board? Am I going to make it back for friends at 8 o'clock? Is it going to? Do I know these people? Is it going to be uncomfortable? Is it going to be cold there? So we base all these experiences of the unknown or the adventure on familiar feelings of the past. So then, if we think about this, what are feelings anyway? What are emotions? How do we describe those? Do you know that when we're in the midst of an experience, any experience, but new experiences, novel experiences, when we're in the midst of a novel experience, everything we're seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling and hearing, all of our 5 senses, they're gathering volumes of information through 5 different pathways, and they're sending a flood of information to the brain all at once. And it's causing gangs of neurons to string into place and release chemicals. And those chemicals that are released when those neurons begin to fire are called feelings or emotions. So emotions and feelings are the end products of experience. And we can remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel. So you remember where you were on 9/11? Because you remember how that felt, right? Remember your first kiss? Because you remember how that... Well, do you remember your first then? Because you remember how that felt, right? In other words, something then, all of your sensory information in the midst of that experience raised the threshold of your normal chemical continuity. It broke the routine thinking and feeling, and it was enough of a change chemically that it pushed the threshold so it got your awareness. And when we put our awareness on it, that is an event in and of itself, and we remember. And so you can remember catching the fish off the coast of Mexico in January and reeling that thing in. You can remember the people there and the day it was, and you can remember it was sunny and the boat you were on, and you can remember the type of fish, and you can remember everything, because that thrill of catching that fish was enough of a change in your internal chemistry that you caught your awareness. To say it simply, something from your external world produced some internal change in the brain and the body. And that external thing producing some internal change is an event in and of itself, and it's called a memory. But the funny thing about it is you can't remember what you had for lunch the day before. Because routine then lulls the brain back to sleep. Now, you're geniuses, right? You're smart, right? I believe that. So if you have people in your life that keep living in the same feelings and in the same emotions every single day, is anything new happening in their life? Because if feelings and emotions are the end product of an experience, shouldn't every new experience have a new feeling? And if they keep living by the same feelings, what are they doing? They're remembering the past. And those people who talk about the good old days, we know what that means? Nothing new is happening. And so they have to recall memories from the past to try to make the same chemicals in their brain so that they can remember who they were back at that time, because that's all they have. Does that make sense? So did I ever say emotions were bad? Didn't I say emotions are the end product of experience? And when we live by the same emotions every single day, it means we're just not having any new experiences. And to have a new experience is to evolve the brain. And to live by the predictable feelings and emotions that are familiar and are the ways of being that we've created by thinking and feeling, then what we're saying is that we've created personality traits that define us as who we are. And the only way we forget about harsh memories is to make new memories. So, do you believe then that your thoughts have anything to do with your destiny? How many people believe that that's possible? So, if you believe that your thoughts have anything to do with your future, and feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, if you live every single day remembering the same feelings or recreating the same feelings, what is your future going to look like? More of the past. Would you agree? So then the reason why the uncommon never happens or the supernatural never happens is that because we have to break free from those afflictive emotional states long enough to then allow new information into the system for us to begin to create a new destiny. The quantum law still applies to all of that. If you're living by feelings and emotions, you're still enacting the quantum law. Would you agree? Which means that you're going to create your destiny based on the way you're thinking and feeling. Now, over the last 8 years now, I've been studying people who have had spontaneous remissions from disease. Now, I'm not talking about just skin rashes or, styes in your eye, but I'm talking about cancer and diabetes and cardiac conditions like high blood pressure, tachycardia, high cholesterol levels, high blood pressure, organic conditions that have to do with the endocrine system, endocrine imbalances, chronic pain syndrome, depression, anxiety, rare genetic disorders that medical science had no solution for. And I wanted to find out what was in common amongst these people, because they were given a diagnosis medically, they were given certain tests. The doctor said, this is your condition, here's the conventional protocol, and follow this protocol, and we can't predict that it's going to work, but this is what we do. And a lot of people, went the conventional route and it didn't work. Some people didn't want to go the conventional route, but they all got better. And when they got their tests back after a period of time, the blood tests and the CAT scans and all the evaluations came back changed. Now that caught my attention because that's science, right? Now I wanted to find out what they did that made it so unique. And I can tell you what they didn't have in common. Not all of them were men. Not all of them were spiritual. Not all of them were white. I think only a few were vegetarians. That's relieving. I hope I don't upset anybody. Some of them smoked and drank. Some of them cussed. Not everybody was a rabbi or a priest or a minister. Not all of them used crystals. None of them actually did. They all didn't pray to the same God. Some of them weren't even religious. They had no religious affiliation. But what they did have in common is that they changed their mind. Now, so I wanted to know what the process was, right? Now, something happens in medical science once. The word we use to describe something out of the uncommon, it's called an incident. Oh, there was an incident in the hospital the other day. Someone was healed of cancer. Now, if two related events happen within a similar period of time, what's that called? Oh, there was a coincidence. There's two people that were healed of a similar condition. Now, if it starts happening 3 and 4 and 5, 6 times, 10 times. I've studied people in 17 different countries, hundreds of people. And when it starts happening more and more, we're starting to look at a trend here. Would you agree? In other words, there's some cause producing an effect, and something repeatable is happening. And anything repeatable in science bridges on a law. Would you guys agree? So a cause is producing an effect. So I wanted to know what was in common amongst these people. So I interviewed them. Now, there were 4 things in common amongst every healing that took place. They had 4 beliefs that they all subscribed to. The first belief was this. They all accepted, they all understood, they all speculated, they all believed, they all knew that there was this greater mind living within them that was giving them life. That there was some spiritual aspect of themselves or higher order or innate intelligence. There was something divine that was giving them life every single second. And they reasoned that if they could just make contact with this greater mind, if they could just interact with it, if they could just develop a relationship, with it, if they could just give it orders and then surrender to it, that it would do the healing for them. Now, there's nothing mystical about this intelligence. It's the same intelligence that keeps your heart beating right now. Right now, your heart is beating over 2 gallons of blood per minute, over 100 gallons of blood in an hour, over 10,000 times in one day, through 60,000 miles of blood vessels. And yet your circulatory system only weighs 3% of your body mass. Now, are you thinking about keeping your heart beating? And it does that without repair or orders or stopping or rest. It does it on its own. And do you know that in every single second you lose 10 million cells? Oh, you just made another 10 million. Were you thinking about that? The checkbook and the Visa bill is enough, right? So then there's a greater mind that's taking care of business for you. Would you agree? And independent of your race, your color, your gender, your age, your creed, the color of your hair, your past, your rights, your wrong, it's still loving you enough to give you life. Isn't that amazing? And it's yours. And it is you. Because it's giving you life. And that in every single cell of your body, out of the 70 to 100 trillion cells, you go through 100,000 chemical reactions per second per cell. Now multiply that by the 100 trillion cells. We're a work in progress, would you agree? And we're riding on the back of a giant. And these people said, I just want to whisper in its ear. I want to give it a template. I want to give it an idea. I want to give it my wish. And then I want to get out of the way. I want to surrender to it and let it do it for me. And I'm going to have no doubt. And I'm not going to worry. And I'm not going to awfulize. And I'm not going to get sick over my own fears. I have made a relationship with this mind because I've taken the time every single day to interact with it, to talk to it, to confess to it, to ask for help. And just like a relationship with anybody, it started to respond. How did I know? I started to feel differently. And I was feeling differently without anything in my environment making me feel differently. And so, this intelligence has a will much greater than your will. Would you agree? Or my will. It has a mind so much greater than our mind. Would you agree? And it has a love for life that's so much greater than our fickle love for life. And you know, these people, what they knew was that when their will matched its will, and when their mind matched its mind, and when their love for life matched its love for life, it stepped in and did the healing for them. That's the first thing they had in common. Now, this intelligence has been with us from the moment of our creation. Do you think it knows you pretty well? Do you think it observes your thoughts all day long? And it's like a great parent waiting for you to ask for help. But it's unconditionally loving enough to allow you to run out of the house, lie, take the car keys, keep your room dirty, ask for this, want more allowance, do all that stuff, and it's just watching. And it's not going to meet you halfway.
My name is Liz Dawn, and I'm with Celebrate Your Life Events. And the presentation that you've been listening to was recorded live at one of our Celebrate Your Life conferences. And this program was created exclusively for Evan's audience. And I'm super thrilled to share this information with you. So come check us out. Take a look at all of our retreats and programs and conferences that we have to offer. Click the link below, and hopefully I'll see you in person. All right, now let's get back to the presentation.
And so these people got serious, and they developed a relationship with this mind. That's the first thing they had in common. The second thing they had in common was that their thinking, or their thoughts, or their reactions, they realized that they were responsible for their own disease. It wasn't that their husband left them with 3 kids 10 years ago and they hate, that was their bad moment, or that their father beat them because he was an alcoholic, or because they were black or Oriental, or any of that. They said, it was my own thinking that created my disease. I'm responsible for my own condition. And it's my thoughts and my reactions and my mismanagement of them that created the same chemical state that caused the genes to begin to wear out, so the proteins in my body began to break down, and I created a chronic condition. Now, we said that every time we have a thought, we make a chemical, right? And if you keep thinking the same single thought every single day, all day long, that has the same feeling, fear or unworthiness or self-hatred, do you know that those signals will keep pushing and turning on the genes over and over again on a cellular level? And it was those thoughts then that began to push the genetic buttons of their inherited genetic tendencies that created their condition. Can you accept that? So here's what they said. I got to change. I got to stop. I can't do this anymore. I can't think and feel and think until feelings become the means of thinking. I got to think outside of how I feel. I got to think greater than how I'm feeling. I got to stop the process. And so what they did was that they acknowledged then that not only was their thoughts that created their condition, but they acknowledged that it was their reaction to everything in their environment. In other words, their environment, all the things in their environment were causing them to react and think equal to the things in their environment. So was your thoughts, is the environment controlling your thinking, or is your thinking controlling your environment? because that's the question they really fundamentally ask themselves. Now, do you know that 75 to 90% of every person that goes into a healthcare facility goes in there because of a stress-related disorder? Do you know that? Yeah. 75 to 90%. And you know what stress is? Stress is when our body's knocked out of normal chemical balance, normal homeostatic balance, normal order. Stressors are things that knock us out of balance. They could be people, they could be circumstances, they could be trauma, they could be chemicals, they could be psychological stress or emotional stress. But you know, human beings, because we're so smart, you know, our stressors are just a little bit more complex. It's not food, shelter, eat, or be eaten. It's internet connections, it's second mortgages, it's traffic jams, it's single parenting. And, you know, when we're in stress, we're in survival. Now, the chemicals of survival, I want you to pay attention to this. The chemicals of survival are the harshest chemicals to the body because the body is not designed for long-term stress. Gazelles hanging out in the Serengeti, grazing. Lion sees the gazelle. Lion gets up and chases the gazelle. The gazelle gets away. Both are under the fight-or-flight nervous system. Would you agree? The gazelle gets away, looks around. 10 minutes later, what does it start doing? Grazing again, right? What does the lion do? Lays on his back and he goes, I better take a nap, right? And that's called acute stress. It's over. Not with human beings. You see, when we turn on the stress response, when we turn on those chemicals of stress and we can't turn them off, we're headed for disease. Now, we do something really well. Do you know the privilege of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else? Do you know that we can do that? That's what makes us so unique, by the way. We can make thought more real than anything else. Now, here's what we do every single day. We get prepared for an event to happen. We start forecasting and expecting and predicting the event to happen, and we get prepared physiologically for it to happen. We think ahead, and when we get it right, what do? Pat ourselves on the back and we say, hey, look at me, I'm smart, right? I was ready. But what happens when it doesn't happen? That's called anxiety, insomnia, obsessive-compulsive disorders, panic attacks. Because what we're doing is we're thinking about the event and we're focusing on it so well that we're turning on the stress response by thought alone. And we do it all day long. And if we can turn on the stress response by thought alone, we don't need the environment any longer. We just have to remember and forecast, and the body produces the same chemicals as if the event was taking place. And we do it over and over again, and now when we turn on the stress response and we can't turn it off, that's what creates disease. Because think about it. Those chemicals of fight or flight, they're there for emergency situations. They're turning on the body to do what? To deal with an event that's taking place in their external environment. That's one system. Mobilize energy. The other system, called the parasympathetic nervous system, is a nervous system of repair, restoration, regeneration, rest, reorganization, replenishing, all of that. But if we keep staying on the fight or flight nervous system, we keep mobilizing energy, do we have any energy for repair? So if a cancer cell starts getting out of hand, but we're mobilizing all the energy to deal with some event, real or imagined, is there any energy to deal with the cancer cell? So the body says, you know what, we don't have any energy. We'll get to that later. It's like, if a hurricane is coming towards your house, are you going to remodel the kitchen? That's exactly how the body perceives it. So they realized then that they were creating their own condition because they were turning on the stress response and they couldn't turn it off. And now when we have an emotional reaction or a stress reaction for something, and it creates a reaction in us, creates an internal chemical change, that emotional reaction, in the West, we think that's so real. Do you know what I mean? Oh, my gosh, you should see what I'm feeling right now, and I'm going to tell you all about it. Right? And after the emotional reaction, there's this thing called a refractory period. And in this refractory period, it's when the chemicals stay going. And, we can learn how to shorten that refractory period. That's called emotional intelligence, right? To be able to curb or shorten that emotional reaction, because during that refractory period, we say and do really dumb things. See, when those chemicals are running, the most common thing we say after they've run out is this: I should have never said that. I should have never done that, right? Because we're acting as an amped up animal in fight or flight, in survival with a big brain. And when we're acting in that way, we're acting always in predictable ways. And no new information, no new knowledge can enter into the system during that period. In other words, we can't learn anything new. So if we let that emotional period go for longer than just an hour or two, and we keep it going voluntarily, do you know what that turns into? It turns into a mood. You know, you have an emotional reaction, then you keep it going because it kind of feels good, and you let it run for a little bit longer, and someone says, "What's wrong?" What do you say? "I'm just in a mood. I'm just in this mood." And then if we keep moods going for days on end, what's that called? A temperament. "Oh, this is my temperament. You see, I'm just this way. I'm short-tempered," or I'm this type of person. And if we keep temperaments going for months and years, what's that called? Personality trait. And all the personality traits are created because we had some chemical reaction that we've sustained for long periods of time. And these people said, "I got to quit it. I got to stop it. I got to break that chemical continuity." Which brings me to the third thing they had in common. They all said, "I have to reinvent myself. I got to become somebody else. I can't be the same person. I can't think and act this way any longer because the only person that's suffering is me. Even if I hate my father for 20 years because he left me when I was, 10, I'm the only person that's suffering." Would you agree? And would you agree that if they're perceiving suffering because they had an experience and their brain is wired that way, that they'll always tend to find the people in their life that keep that chemical agreement going? And if you took their husband that they've just divorced them and tossed them to the other side of the moon, wouldn't you agree that they're still wired for suffering? And guess who they'll find in their next relationship? Out of 1,000 people, they'll find the right person just to keep that continuity going. And that's what's so difficult about change, because all the people in our life, we have those chemical connections with. So all of a sudden you decide to change, right? And you have a friend that you always walk with every single day and complain about your husband with, or you got a guy you play golf with, you always complain about all the stuff in your life, and all of a sudden you say, "I'm no longer going to complain, I'm no longer going to suffer, I'm no longer going to blame, I'm no longer going to make excuses, and I'm no longer going to live in self-pity. No more of that stuff. I'm going to stop thinking and acting and feeling in the same way." So now you're hanging out with your buddy, and all of a sudden they're walking along or they're playing golf and they're going off on all this stuff, and you're like this. And they look at you and they say, "What is wrong with you?" Which means, "You're not going to jump in here with me?" And they're going to say, "Then what? I liked you so much better the other way. You're changing. I don't like that." And that's a sign, because our environment goes into chaos because we don't have the same agreements any longer. Am I making sense still? So these people said, "I have to reinvent myself. I have to become somebody else." Now here's what they did. They asked themselves some really important questions. I call them frontal lobe questions. They asked themselves some questions that stopped those automatic programs. And those questions were stuff like this. What would it be like to be happy? Who do I know in my life that's a happy person? What would I have to change about myself to be happy? Who in history do I admire? That was great. And when do I fall from grace? And who is it? And what do I feel when I feel this way? And they sat down and they started to wait for answers. And by asking those questions, do you know what was happening? They were stopping their thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking long enough to get some important answers. And what was happening is the brain, to gather the answer to those questions, had to begin to fire in new sequences, in new patterns, and new combinations. And when we change the way the brain fires, when we change the way the brain works, we change the mind, because mind is the brain in action. Mind is the brain at work. Mind is what the brain does. So they started to create a new level of mind. They began, when they started to contemplate and go inward and introspectively speculate on what it would be like, the thought process was the building process of new neurological architecture. Now, do you think that you can change your brain just by thinking about it? You think you can do that? They did this experiment a little ways back where they took 4 groups of people that have never played the piano before, and they divided them into 4 different categories. And they said, "Listen, we're going to teach you how to play the piano, and we're going to do a brain scan on you. And we're going to scan your brain before, we're going to teach you the stuff, and then we're going to scan your brain after, and we're going to see if you can grow new circuits." Now, functional brain scans really do one thing. They study the brain in action. They study the brain working over time. If you had a problem with your brain, 30 years ago, when you went to the doctor, they took a snapshot of your brain. And some doctors still do that. They see if there's any broken parts, any missing pieces, anything not working right, anything in the way, tumors. They look for things in there. But if nothing comes out on a gross level, then they say, oh, well, we don't know what it is. But functional brain scans, they can study the brain working over time, and by studying how the brain is working and what areas are absorbing blood and nutrients, we're able to gain a hell of a lot more information about what the brain has to say to us. And it can tell which circuits become activated that weren't activated before. So they said to these guys, okay, so here's what we're going to do. The first group, we're going to scan your brain before. We're going to give you these one-handed finger exercises, scales and chords. You come and practice them for 2 hours a day for 5 days. At the end of 5 days, we're going to scan your brain again to see if you grow any new brain circuits. First group of people, they come, they play the scales and chords, they get them all down. 5 days in a row. At the end of 5 days, they rescan the brain, and guess what happens? Whole new set of circuits grow on the opposite side of the brain. Now, doesn't that make sense? You learn something, you get some instruction, you apply it, you pay attention, and you repeat it, you're going to grow brain circuits. That's the way it works. Second group of people, they said, come for 2 hours a day for 5 days. We'll scan your brain before. We'll scan your brain after. But we're not going to tell you. We're not going to give you any knowledge. We're not going to give you any information. Play whatever you want. No scales and chords. You guys do what you want. At the end of 5 days, guess what happened to those people? Very little. You know why? Because they didn't learn anything. They didn't learn things making new connections, so they didn't have any instruction. They couldn't remember what they did the day before, and they couldn't pay attention, so they couldn't repeat it, and so they grew very little brain circuits. Make sense? Third group of people, they said, don't even show up. Guess what happened to them? Nothing. They were doing the same things in the same ways, and no new circuits formed. The last group of people, they said, come for 2 hours a day for 5 days. We're going to teach you the scales and chords, but instead of you actually physically demonstrating, physically rehearsing those scales and chords, we want you to mentally rehearse them. We want you to think about remembering them, doing them over and over in your mind. And we'll have a metronome going back and forth, and if you fall asleep, we'll nudge it with a broomstick. But you're going to practice. And at the end of 5 days, guess what happened? They grew the same exact brain circuits as the people who physically performed the activity, which means they changed their brain just by thinking, which means when we are truly paying attention, when we're truly focused, the brain does not know the difference between what's happening out there and what's happening in here. Now, here's my question to you. What do you mentally rehearse all day long? And what do you physically rehearse or demonstrate all day long? In other words, what do you think about and how do you act all day long? Because what you think about and how you act is who you are on a neurological level, just like the piano players. Did you get that? So these people, when they asked those questions, they began to rehearse a new way of being. They began to rehearse a greater ideal of themselves. They began to think about who they wanted to become. And, they just didn't, use the stored knowledge and experience in their brain. They didn't just use their memory. You know what they did? They read books about great people. They read books about people who did amazing things because they wanted to use that information to add to the equation of who they wanted to become. They wanted to create a new model and a new ideal of themselves. And they practiced it every single day, which leads me to the fourth thing. And during that time where they were mentally rehearsing a new way of being, they had long moments where they lost track of time and space. They were so involved with what they were thinking about that when they opened their eyes or turned on the lights in the room or lifted up their blindfolds, they expected it to be 15, 20 minutes later, and it was an hour and a half later. They had no idea that much time passed by. They were so involved with what they were thinking about that there was no time and there was no space. Now, do you know that your brain processes 400 billion bits of information every single second? I said it in the movie. The brain processes 400 billion bits of information every single second. And you're aware of only 2,000 of those 400 billion bits. You know what those 2,000 bits of information have to do with? The body, the environment, and time. That's it. Are you cold? Are you hungry? Do you have a headache? Does your back hurt? Do you like the way it smells in here? Do you like the person sitting next to you? How long is he going to talk? Are we going to get a break? Out of all the information that your brain is processing, we keep this mobile thing called awareness on the body, the environment, and time. Incidentally, when we live in stress and we live in survival, there's only three things that's important when we're in those chemicals of stress. You know what they are? The body, the environment, and time. Is your body going to survive in this environment, and how much time is it going to take? We condition ourselves to live that way. In the process of creation, in the process of flourishing, in the process of growth, when we're truly focused, there is no body, there is no mind, there is no thing, and there is no time. The only thing that's real in that moment is the thought. And the frontal lobe, which is the newest and most developed part of the human brain, it's the latest piece of neurological architecture that we possess to this day. It makes up 40% of our entire brain. It's what separates us from every other species. It's not the fact that you stand on 2 feet or you have little body hair or that you have opposing thumbs or that you have a big brain. An elephant has a bigger brain than us. What separates us from every other species on the planet is the size of the frontal lobe in reference to the rest of the brain. And the frontal lobe makes up 40% of the entire brain. Now here's what the frontal lobe does. It's the symphony leader. It's the CEO. It's the architect. It's the designer. And when we're truly paying attention to a thought or an idea, the frontal lobe lowers the volume to the stimulus from the body. It lowers the volume from the information from the environment. And it lowers the volume to the concept of time. In other words, it begins to cool off the circuits in the brain that have to do with emotions. It cools off the circuits in the brain that have to do with feeling your body. It cools off the circuits that have to do with movement. It cools off the circuits that have to do with time. And if we don't have those circuits working any longer, if we say the brain is, when the brain is working, we produce mind, and if their brain isn't working in those areas, is there a mind in that area? So there is no mind, because the mind isn't there to process information related to the environment, the body, and time. And the only thing that's real in that moment is thought. And when that happens, the brain captures the imagery as if it is the experience in and of itself. And it begins to lay down new architecture and new patterns and new sequences and new neural circuits. And now those people were literally rewiring their brain, and every time they did it, they turned on the same circuits over and over again, and it allowed them to begin to stand on that platform so that when they stepped out into their life, they were living as that person instead of the old person. Now you may say, well, this mental rehearsal thing, Joe, works really good if you're going to change your brain and your mind, but it can't change your body. How's it going to change your body? That's impossible. Well, they did another experiment. They took a group of people, 2 groups. One group was a control group. With the second group, they said, listen, here's what we're going to do. We want you to come and pull this spring with your finger for an hour a day, every day for 4 weeks. And we're going to test to see if this muscle gets stronger after 4 weeks. Well, after 4 weeks of these people pulling the spring an hour a day, when they went to the lab at the end of 4 weeks, they tested that finger, and it had a 30% increase in muscle strength. That makes sense, right? You exercise, you pull this, you put a load on a muscle, the proteins break down. When the proteins break down, they grow back a little bigger, and the muscle's stronger to resist the load. It's normal physiology, right? No big deal. You do that in the gym. But the second group of people said, we want you to come for an hour a day. We want you to pull this spring in your mind. We want you to mentally rehearse pulling the spring. We never want you to touch it. We want you to do it for 4 weeks. At the end of 4 weeks, they pull the people into the lab. They ask them to pull the spring. They never touch the spring. And that strength in that finger had a 22% increase. And they never touched the spring. How do you explain that to your mother? You know, I read all these terrible, these hard, these just bland scientific documents, and I always try to pull out the jewels, So I know I always have to explain it to my mother, right? So I go, Mom, come here, I want to talk to you. She goes, no, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me. I don't want to hear it today. Isn't that amazing, Mom? She says, you going to eat that or not? Now, the law in neuroscience is this. Nerve cells that fire together wire together. Those people, if you keep firing the same neurons in the same way, they develop long-term relationships. It's the way it works. Nerve cells that fire together ultimately wire together. So if they're pulling the same, imagining that they're pulling the same spring every single day for an hour, are they firing the same circuits in their brain? And if you fire the same circuits in the brain over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, after a period of time, the neurons start to release this chemical. And it's like a miracle grow to neurons. It's like a fertilizer, and it causes neurons to glue together and not only glue together, but develop more enriched and intricate circuits, branch new circuits and connect more intricately. And so if nerve cells that fire together wire together, and they formed a more intricate set of circuits, it was their mind that moved that finger because they had more neural circuits in place to send a stronger signal to that muscle. And it wasn't the muscle that got stronger. It was the neural circuits they had in place to send a greater signal to cause that muscle to act stronger. So then we can literally change the way our mind and body works just by thought alone. Now, there were two minor things that they had in common. One thing they had in common is they all said that, well, not all of them, but most of them said that their doctors said that they were crazy. Well, that makes sense, though, right? I mean, if you go to the doctor and you have a heart condition or you have a condition, your doctor is going to do what's conventional, right? Which is, to me, totally acceptable. But, you know, when nothing else worked for a lot of people, and they said, I'm just going to change my mind, most of the doctors said, you know, I got another card for you, and I think you need to see this guy, you know, or this woman. But, you know, if you think about it, what is the definition of a miracle anyway? Isn't it something that happens out of convention? Whether it's social convention or scientific convention or religious convention or political convention, outside of our current beliefs, if something happens outside of our current beliefs, we say, that was a miracle, right? And isn't it interesting also that everybody that ever embraced a miracle, they all had to be willing to look foolhardy or crazy? They had to step out of convention and take on the slings and arrows of the people that were perceiving things in terms of convention? Well, these people knew that they had to make changes, and they had nothing else to do. So, but all the doctors said the same thing after they started getting better. They all said the same thing. They all said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And the other thing they had in common is this. Without a doubt, they all knew. They knew that they were healed. It wasn't like, geez, I hope I'm better, or geez, I don't know. They just said, you know what? Something changed, and I'm different. I know it. I can't explain it, but I know that I'm better. Now, tomorrow, when we have time, I'll talk about those memory systems in place, and I'm going to show you all the slides of neurons hooking up and what it looks like, and forming circuits and connections, what mind is, what neural nets look like, how we assemble those. Because if you understand that, that will give you permission to sit down and seriously realize that when you think differently, you're breaking the box of that normal sequence and combination and pattern that you think and act every single day. The box of your mind is the most commonly fired, most neurologically wired neurons that you've thought into place because you think the same way. So then to break out of the box of thinking is to do what? Make the brain fire in new ways, right? In new patterns and new sequences and new combinations, to break the habit of being ourselves. And that takes practice, and that takes determination, and that takes will. But if you accept then that if you could possibly change your mind, and to sustain that change of mind independent of the external circumstances in your life, would you agree then that your mind now is greater than the environment? And there's nothing in your external world that would move you from that internal state because you've thought about it, you've practiced it, you can mentally rehearse it, you can physically demonstrate it, and now you are in a new state of being. And that new state of being then, just like the person who suffers, who doesn't want to move from that internal chemical continuity, we can create states of joy and freedom and wonder and self-love, and we can practice and insist on them so much, just like the piano players, that becomes the new neurochemical state. And in that new neurochemical state, we can be as insistent on this state as the person who suffers. Would you agree? And if then the environment is an extension of the mind, and we can change our mind, should there be something different in our life? Should the environment be changed because our neurological processes have changed? Can you accept that? So I was telling the story in Miami last week, and I'm going to tell you. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's a rocker. I mean, she's just a great kid. And my kids, they all work on something. They all have to work on something, and they get no help from me. You got it? So they're going to do something. They're going to create something in their future, but I'm not going to help them. I'm not going to say, here's the money for this or whatever. I'm not going to do that. They got to do it on their own. I mean, I take care of them, and I help them in a lot of ways, but when it comes to their one thing they're working on, they got to have this relationship with this greater mind And they got to have it come in a way that's going to be unusual, unpredictable, surprising, and leave no doubt that something happened and there was a greater mind that orchestrated it. So my daughter, and she's done a lot of great things, she says to me one day, listen, I want to have an unlimited shopping spree. This is what she told me. So I said, okay, so here's the deal. I said, listen, the deal is this. You got to rehearse it, but you cannot come out of that room in the morning the same character that woke up. You have to come out as a new person, as if you've just finished the shopping spree. You got to be in the joy that it's already done because you lived it in your mind. Because if we can live it in our mind enough times that it gets mapped in our brain or tracked in our brain, then our brain is no longer a record of the past, but it's a map to the future because it's already happened. Would you agree? I said, you can't sit down and be the lazy, tired teenager and get up and come in and have your cereal and lean over. You got to come out like, that was a great shopping spree. And you got to come out with the chemicals, mind and body aligned. You can't have your mind doing one thing and your body doing the other. They got to be aligned in the same way. And that's what we'll talk about tomorrow, how to get the mind and body working together. So that's the deal, okay? So each morning she'd come out like this. Good morning. Great morning. How was your day? Great. Did you enjoy it? Oh, yeah. Woo! She'd be like that. So I said, well, and then I'd make her do it at least 2, sometimes 3 times. I'd make her do it. I'd inspire her to do it, right?
Teenager, right?
No, listen, that's the deal. Because when they do that, my kids have done enough to know that it works, But the only reason that they don't want to do it is this. You ready? Because this may sound familiar to you. I don't feel like it, right? But I would say, come on, just do it anyway, right? So here she goes, right? Every morning I see her coming out, big smile on her face. In the evening, how'd it go? Great, She's living it in her mind. That's where I want her to experience it. She's sitting down as herself. She's getting up as a new self in a new chemical state. Her mind and body are in agreement, right? Because most times when manifestations don't happen, your mind's like this, but your body's still living with what? The emotions of the conditioned emotional states from the past, right? So she's got it all worked out. She's young. She's neuroplastic. She's free every day. So then I'm in Washington, D.C., and I call her up on the phone just out of the blue, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? There's a long pause, and all of a sudden she's giggling on the other end of the phone. I'm like, what? She said, you know that unlimited shopping spree? I go, yeah. She goes, it happened today. I'm like, what? I said, all right, tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. I want to know everything. She goes, okay, you ready? So she was visiting a friend in Los Angeles. She said, I'm at the Promenade in Santa Monica, and we're shopping around. We go to our favorite store that we always go to. We go in the store, and we're just going, rushing through the racks, and all of a sudden, this guy sees us, this grown-up like your age, comes over, and he says, now this is when she was 15, I think when it happened, or 16. She says, he comes up, and she notices my friend, and he says, hey, I know your father, and I've done business with him, and I owe him a big favor. And he says, and this is my store. He says, come on in the back. He takes the company credit card out, swipes it through the thing, hands it to the 2 girls, and he says, have a great afternoon, ladies. So I say to no, I always test my kids because I love them to do that. So she tells me the story, and she's laughing, and the laughing slows down and it stops, and there's this long silence. And she's like, Dad, are you there? Now I'm testing her, right? So I go, yeah, I'm here. She knows what I'm going to ask her. You know what I'm going to ask her, right? I say, all right, so how much did you spend? She said, Dad, I spent $9,000 today. I said, are you guilty about that? She said, nope. I said, never be guilty for anything that you create. Now, here's my question to you. What was the new emotion that was created from the new experience? Was it survival? Was it pain? Was it unworthiness? Or was it this sense of awe and wonder? Because she interacted with the mind, and it came in a way that she could never predict. And would you agree then that the next time she sits down, she's going to have any problem doing that again? And when I say to her, you can't get up until you're in that state where you felt like it already happened, do you know she has the hardware in place to know what it feels like after it already happened? Would you agree? And wouldn't that help to fuel the experience a little bit quicker the next time? So I take my kids to Mexico every Christmas, and I ask them all the hard questions. No yes or no questions, questions that they have to think about. I give them that meh when they give me the wrong answer, and they got to go think about it. So my daughter, she's done a lot of great things, and she's now going to school in Switzerland because she made a deal with me that if she could do 4 years of high school in 2 years, I would send her to any boarding school in the world, which of course she did, and here I am sending her to Switzerland, which was I was keeping my end of the deal up, right? And I wanted to do that. But what I made her do was that she had a list of things that she had to do, like her shopping list, in order to get to Switzerland, so that these events would open up and doors would open up so she could walk through, be in the flow. So I'm in with her in Mexico, and I say to her, she's talking to me about how, this is a teenager now, she's 16, she's saying, I just don't, I'm so exposed to the world, and I realize how much I don't know, and I want to just keep learning. She's telling me this after, 6 months at the school. And I say to her, so don't you think it was worth it? All those times you didn't feel like doing it and you did it anyway. Wasn't it worth it? And she just gets this big grin on her face, and she says, welcome to my dream. Now, isn't that cool when you're thinking that big in terms of your life? Now, is there any difference between my daughter and you? Same machinery in the brain?
Waiting for Dad.
No, listen, I swear. Would you agree, though, that you have the same neurology? Yes. Same frontal lobe? Yes. Same ability to make the same chemicals? Yes. Same ability to think greater than your environment? Yes. So can you believe in a future that you cannot perceive with your senses, that already has happened enough times in your mind that your brain has now mapped those changes? Because when we live by that way, we live by the quantum law. And the quantum law says the environment is an extension of our mind. And the feelings and the emotions that we create from our own ability to create leaves us in wonder. It leaves us in awe. It leaves us with an appreciation for life, where you don't want to change one person or one thing because you're so happy with yourself. Now I say that is the natural state of being. That is the natural state in which we live. That is what it is to be human. And when we can take the mind out of the body and put it back in the brain, and we can begin to develop a relationship with this mind, and then to have the courage and the willingness and the audacity and boldness to say, okay, greater mind, you're giving me life. My heart's still beating. My environment is an extension of my mind. If I'm taking the time today to interact with you and emulate you as a creator, I'm enacting you, I'm acting like you, I'm acting divine as a creator, let me know if you're observing. Let me know if you're watching me. Let me know if you're paying attention. And if I, in fact, make contact with you, show me a sign. But don't bring it in a way that I can predict it, because if I can predict it, I'm in the same hardware of my old self. Bring it in a way that's so unpredictable that it leaves no doubt that it's come from your mind. And surprise me. Bring it in a way that's so unusual that I know that it came from you, so that the next time I do this, I'm more divine and less human. Thanks for listening.
To see another amazing Joe Dispenza talk, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
We're so powerful that in a matter of moments, we can unravel a thought, and that thought can produce the same chemistry in our body as bad news, good news, traffic jams, internet connections, kids, relationships, finances.